Hello, Helmet Steel. Welcome back to the channel, where we dive into the stories of history's greatest leaders, conquerors, and visionaries. What truly makes someone interesting? Is it their achievements, their intellect, or the way they make you see the world differently? For me, what makes a man truly fascinating is his ability to provoke thought, to ask questions that linger in your mind long after the conversation has ended. In my opinion, the most interesting man in history is Socrates, not because of what he accomplished, but because of how he changed the way we think. Socrates didn't give us answers. Instead, he gave us questions that made us uncomfortable, that made us question ourselves, our society, and even the meaning of life itself. Today, we're going to delve into how Socrates' method of asking these questions was revolutionary, and why I believe his way of thinking is as important today as it was 2,500 years ago. Let's begin by exploring not just who Socrates was, but how his mind worked, and how, if we listen closely, we might unlock something in our own minds as well. Socrates was born into a humble life in Athens. The son of a stonemason and a midwife, he lived at a time when Athens was at the height of its cultural and political power, but also at the brink of its eventual decline. Socrates spent much of his early life observing the world around him, not as a scholar in a formal sense, but as a curious man, always questioning. Imagine that curiosity. As a young man, he didn't seek wealth or status. Instead, he wandered the streets and marketplaces of Athens, engaging people in conversation, asking simple but powerful questions. He would ask them, what is justice? What is virtue? What does it mean to live a good life? These are questions that seem straightforward at first glance, but when you stop to really think about them, they become complex, nuanced, and often unanswerable. Socrates showed us that the pursuit of wisdom begins not with knowing, but with recognizing what we do not know. The power of the Socratic Method. At the heart of Socrates' approach to wisdom was his method of questioning, what we now call the Socratic Method. It wasn't about showing off how much he knew or proving others wrong. It was about guiding people to discover their own truths through inquiry. Let's dive into an example. Imagine you're having a conversation about morality. You say, to be moral means to follow the law. Now, if Socrates were there, he wouldn't just nod and agree. He would probe deeper. But what if the law is unjust? What if a law commands you to harm others? Is following the law still moral in that case? This is where the brilliance of Socrates' method comes to light. He forces you to rethink, to dig deeper into your assumptions. You might respond, well, I guess in some cases the law could be immoral. And so the dialogue continues as Socrates asks you to reconsider your initial certainty. By the end, you've shifted your perspective, realizing that morality might not be as simple as following the rules. Think about your own life. How many of your beliefs would stand up to Socratic questioning? Could you defend them, not just to others but to yourself? What assumptions are you carrying with you that may not be as solid as they seem? Socrates in the Agora. The Agora, the bustling marketplace of Athens, was where Socrates did some of his best work. He didn't hold formal classes or write down his ideas. Instead, he engaged with everyday people, from politicians to merchants, from slaves to scholars. It was in these public spaces that Socrates' greatest lessons unfold, not through lectures, but through conversation. Socrates would approach someone, often a prominent figure, and begin with a seemingly innocent question. What is courage, or what does it mean to be just? As they answered, he would gently press them, asking more questions, exposing contradictions in their thinking. The goal wasn't to embarrass them or win an argument. It was to help them see their own ignorance and encourage them to think more deeply. This is where Socrates' brilliance shines. He believed that wisdom wasn't about having all the answers. It was about understanding the limits of your knowledge. I know that I know nothing, he famously said. To Socrates, the first step toward wisdom was recognizing your own ignorance. How many of us can truly admit we don't know something, let alone use that admission as a path toward greater understanding? Socratic Paradoxes. Socrates was known for his paradoxical statements, which often left his listeners stunned or confused. One of his most famous paradoxes was this: no one does wrong willingly. At first glance, this seems absurd. Surely, people commit wrongs all the time, knowingly and willingly. But Socrates argued that when people do wrong, it's because they are ignorant of what is truly good. In other words, if someone truly knew what was best for them and others, they wouldn't choose to act immorally. It's a thought-provoking idea, isn't it? Could it be that when people lie, cheat or harm others, they are acting out of ignorance rather than malice? What if our mistakes are not due to evil intentions, but a misunderstanding of what is truly good? Pause for a moment and think about this in your own life. Can you recall a time when you did something you later regretted? Did you do it out of malice? Or was it because, in the moment, you believed it was the right thing, only to realize later that you were wrong? This paradox is at the heart of Socratic thought, the idea that true wisdom comes from knowing the good, and ignorance of the good leads to wrongdoing. Socrates and the Athenian youth. Socrates had a profound influence on the youth of Athens. Young men gathered around him not because he offered them easy answers, but because he made them think. He inspired them to question authority, challenge the status quo, and to seek their own understanding of truth. But this influence wasn't without consequence. Socrates was accused of corrupting the youth and leading them away from the traditional values of Athens. His method of questioning made people uncomfortable, especially those in power who didn't want their authority questioned. How often do we find ourselves in similar situations today? When we challenge the norms of our society, when we question the way things have always been done, we risk upsetting the balance. But Socrates showed us that real progress comes from discomfort. It comes from challenging ourselves and others to think differently. Would you have been among Socrates' followers in ancient Athens? Or would you have felt uncomfortable with his relentless questioning of your beliefs? The trial and death of Socrates. Socrates' relentless pursuit of truth eventually led to his trial in 399 BCE. He was accused of corrupting the youth and impiety, failing to recognize the gods of Athens. During his trial, Socrates could have defended himself by appealing to the emotions of the jury. He could have begged for mercy, but instead he stood firm in his beliefs. He famously said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Socrates believed that life without questioning, without seeking the truth, was not a life worth living. To him, it was better to die than to live in ignorance. Socrates was sentenced to death by drinking hemlock, a poisonous plant, His friends and followers begged him to escape, to flee the city and avoid his fate. But Socrates refused. He believed that accepting his death was the ultimate act of integrity, a final lesson in living according to one's principles. Imagine facing death with such courage, such calm. Socrates didn't fear death because, to him, it was simply another unknown, another mystery to be explored. Could we approach life and death with the same fearless curiosity? The legacy of Socrates. Socrates left no written works behind, but his legacy lives on through the writings of his students, particularly Plato. The dialogues that Plato recorded give us a glimpse into Socrates' life, his methods, and his philosophy. But more than that, Socrates' legacy lives on in every classroom, in every discussion, in every moment when we stop and ask ourselves, why? His method of questioning laid the foundation for Western philosophy, and his influence can be felt in science, ethics, politics, and education. Even today, when we ask critical questions, when we challenge assumptions, we are continuing the work of Socrates. His life may have ended in Athens thousands of years ago, but his spirit lives on every time we engage in thoughtful, meaningful dialogue. The most interesting man in the world. So why do I think Socrates is the most interesting man in the world? It's not because of his fame or his accomplishments. It's because he made us think. He didn't claim to have the answers, but he showed us how to seek them. Socrates understood that wisdom isn't about knowing everything. It's about recognizing what we don't know and constantly striving to learn more. He taught us that the pursuit of knowledge is a never-ending journey, and that the most important questions are the ones that don't have easy answers. Socrates challenged us to examine our lives, to question our beliefs, and to seek out the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And in a world that often values certainty over curiosity, I believe that makes him the most interesting man who ever lived. Final reflection. Socrates left the world with questions, not answers. And maybe that's his greatest gift to us. As we come to the end of our exploration of his life, I want to leave you with a question, one that Socrates might have asked you himself. What do you truly know? Not what you've been told, not what you assume, but what do you really know for certain? It's a question that forces you to confront the limits of your knowledge and the depths of your ignorance. But that's okay, because it's only through recognizing our ignorance that we can begin to seek true wisdom. So as you go about your life, I challenge you to ask yourself, am I living an examined life? Socrates' life may have ended in Athens thousands of years ago, but his questions still live on today. And as long as we keep asking them, we keep his spirit alive. Thank you for watching, and until next time, remember, the unexamined life is not worth living.